Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatore. Now let's talk a little bit about dual wielding. So this is a topic which I have to say frankly gets more attention online than probably it deserves. As I've had many people have spoken about in videos and essays and books and other things in the past previously about dual wielding, it is not actually something which was very prominent historically in most cultures. It is something, however, which gets an awful lot of attention in modern movies, TV, role-playing games, all kinds of stuff like that, computer games and stuff. So dual wielding is something which is really beloved of the modern world, okay, because it looks cool. You can make really flashy fights with it. You can have two different types of sword instead of just one boring type of sword. And it's kind of something which kind of plays well into the development of a character, and you know, something which looks flashy and looks good on screen, and it has to be said implies a higher level of skill than you get from a person who just uses one sword or uses a sword and a shield or sword and buckler or whatever. But what I do want to just reiterate or kind of emphasize is that it does exist historically. I'm not saying that it's not something that exists historically. It absolutely does in many different cultures. In Renaissance Europe, there is the using of the two swords, sometimes known as side swords, together, documented. There's the using of a pair of rapiers together, documented in treatises. And there's using what was known as a case or pair of falchions, actually was hangers in the 18th century, so basically short sabres together as well. So absolutely in Europe we have it, in Africa you have it, in Asia you have it, most famously probably in Filipino martial arts, but you equally find the use of two swords used together in Chinese martial arts traditionally. And you find obviously the two swords used in Japan, more the katana and the wakizashi together, but you do equally find paired katanas used. So absolutely it is something that can be found across history, across many, many different cultures for different reasons. And this isn't a video talking about why would you use two swords together, although there are different reasons you might use two swords together, including might be environmental, to do with the type of environment you're fighting. Could be cultural, to do with the fact that maybe you aren't in the types of warfare, skirmishing, there aren't many missile weapons, so a shield is not needed. It's more about personal combat. It could be a dueling scenario, where it is specific kind of skill based, you know, to show that you have skill with this unusual weapon combo. It could simply be recreational, and I think that gets overlooked a lot. But certainly in Europe, there is an implication that some of the two-sword fighting systems, they're not something that would be used in war, but they are something that would be used for gladiatorial displays, shall we say. So in other words, to show skill, either in the fencing school or indeed in duels or, you know, contests of kind of proving, maybe trial by combat, although I don't know of any examples of that, but maybe proving your skill or defending your honour, that kind of dueling scenario. But the thing that I really want to address briefly in this video is that I was reading a thread talking about dual wielding, and where one person was saying, my friend of mine really wants to study dual wielding, what sources can they look at? And quite rightly, lots of people listed the sorts of sources I've just been talking about. There are European sources, there's Bolognese, there's Godino, there's loads of stuff actually in Europe for dual wielding, although it's not necessarily massive systems. There are quite a few sources that talk about it or show it. Equally, there's the Persian martial arts as well, Iranian martial arts, and there's African martial arts reconstructions, there's Chinese martial arts, obviously Filipino martial arts, Kali Eskrima, Arnis type stuff, and Japanese martial arts. So there's loads of stuff. If you want to study dual wielding, there are no shortage of traditions that you can kind of investigate and learn from. But what one person said, and what I want to kind of respond to here, is that surely, you know, people only have two arms and two legs. If a person is going to learn to dual wield and fight with two weapons, then it's going to look the same regardless of what tradition they follow. No, absolutely no. That is unfortunately a complete misconception of martial arts and an oversimplification. Now, I've spoken about this topic in the past, but it is really important to get your heads around it, that there is not only one best or logical way to use a given weapon. Is there one system for using a single-edged sword of this type? Do we find that the way of using a wakizashi is the same as using a German Langmesser, or is the same as using an 18th century English hanger, or is the same as using a naval cutlass in the 19th century? No. They're different systems, and yes, there are some common truths to martial arts. Yes, there are some common features. If you're going to cut with the sword, you have to hit with one of the edges. If you're going to thrust with the sword, you have to hit with the point. You do have two legs, so yes, you have to maneuver around, but there are many ways of maneuvering around. You could have an upright stance, you could have a low stance, you could keep one foot forward all the time like we do in sabre or cutlass, or you could have passing footwork. You could move more circularly, you could move more linearly. There's many ways of moving. In terms of cutting, you could be mostly cutting from the wrist, you could be cutting with full body blows with a draw cut, or you could be chopping with full body blows. There's many different ways of cutting. There's many different ways of thrusting, believe it or not. Yes, the pointy end in the other person, I've spoken about that in previous videos, but it does get more complex than that. There's thrusting with opposition, there's thrusting without opposition. There's curved thrusts, there's obviously straight thrusts, there's thrusting in supination and pronation, used on either side from above or below. So there's different ways of attacking, there's different ways of moving, there's different guard positions which might be dictated by the type of weapon, the length of the blade, the balance, the guard, many different things. So, for example, historically, if we look at one weapon, the Langmesser, is there only one style or system for the Langmesser? No, there's a whole bunch. Is there only one style for rapier? No. There are Spanish rapier systems that are diverse between each other, and then overall there's, for example, destreza is very different to, there's variations within destreza, but average destreza, whatever that should be, is very different to certain Italian rapier systems, Fabrice, for example, or if we go later to Alfieri. And then if we look at English rapier, then you find very different to Swettenham, for example, very different way of using the rapier there. There are commonalities, of course, and some of those commonalities, as I've said, come from common features of martial arts and combat, and some of them come from the fact that the weapon is similar. So clearly the way of using a longsword in Fiore's time in Italy has some common facets, some common aspects with using a longsword in Germany in Talhoffer's time, okay, 50 years later. But there are big differences. If you look at what the system that's represented in Talhoffer or Paulus Kau or any of those kind of mid 15th century German systems, they are very different to what's shown in Fiore, or indeed in Vardi, which is later than them, 1480s, but Vardi is more similar to Fiore because it's part of a tradition, part of a lineage. And equally, how similar is the use of the long swords to the Japanese katana? Well, yeah, there's some common features. They have some similar guard positions, but there are lots of differences as well. So, quite simply, using two swords, bring it back to using paired swords. If we want to learn how to use paired swords, will using a pair of swords, say a Langmesser and an arming sword, if we just train a lot, will it look the same as Filipino kali? No, it won't. Will it look the same as Japanese katana and wakizashi? No, it won't. It will look different, and there are different traditions within, there's different Filipino traditions, there's different Japanese traditions, there's different European traditions. So really it comes down to, if you want to be if you just want to learn to use swords, do what you like. If you want to be studying a historical tradition, study a historical source, because if you don't have some kind of source material to base your interpretations and your practice on, then what are you doing? You're just doing modern sports sword. You're doing LARP or whatever, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But if you want to practice a historical system based on documenting, how they were actually using these weapons, you need some kind of source material. And will common weapons always lead to common systems? Absolutely not. Everybody who trains to use a weapon will find their own personal ways of doing it, and anybody who runs a school and starts a lineage will develop their own characteristics and their own style that will be passed down to their students and practiced within that school. There might be divergences between their students, as even happens in my own school. But the fact is that there are many, many ways of skinning a cat. And just because a weapon is similar, or, you know, in this case, paired weapons might be similar, having a weapon in each hand, does not at all mean that you'll end up with a similar fighting style. You might end up with something completely different. Anyway, I hope that's something to think about on a Friday, as it is today. And I'll see you really soon for another video. Take care, folks, and see you soon. Cheers. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.